feels a bit strange. It's good to see you. Old friends, hello. New friends, I look forward to meeting you. It's great to see so many faces that I don't recognise. I used to be one of the vicars at this church a while back, so if we haven't caught that together yet, then it's great to see you this morning. I want you to think of a question, and maybe if you're somebody who needs to work out what you think by talk to the person near you or next to you. And the question is this: are you a morning person? Are you a morning person? Have a little chat amongst the people around you. There are a few people staring as if to say, don't make me talk to people, so you can just think about it. But are we morning people? There's that phrase, are you an early bird or a night owl? And if you sign up to social media, you might have seen the meme that says, I'm neither an early bird or a night owl. I'm a permanently exhausted pigeon. I am not a morning person. I am definitely not. I do wonder what it would be like. I can work late into the night if I need to, but it always takes me a while to get going first thing. The thing is, I am really good at sleeping. Really good. I think it is my strongest gifting is to sleep. And so stopping that abruptly just does not sit well with me. And before we had children, I would regularly sleep through my alarm. Now, I had a big grown-up proper job. I had to commute to London and everything. But the alarm was my enemy. Sometimes even 2 alarm clocks were not enough to wake me up. And my wonderful husband, who is a morning person, we've worked that through over the years. We've been married over 20 years. It's taken a while. But he would get up, have a shower, I would still not have heard any of that, and bring me a hot cup of strong coffee. And he knew for both of us it was better not to say a word, really, until I was at least halfway down the cup of coffee. Made it much better for both of us. The thing is, these days I can't tolerate caffeine, so I have to do it all from my own natural resources. It takes a long time. I am definitely not a morning person. It's funny, I asked this question at the 8:30 service this morning, and the clue is in the title of the service, the 8:30 service. And there were people at the back going, yes, me! They were heckling. They had the energy to do that at 8:30 or about 8:50 in the morning. So yes, I'm a morning person. Yes, you definitely are a morning person, aren't you? And maybe you're one of them here. Maybe you have already run 15 miles this morning and got the roast in the oven and done your housework and read 3 chapters of a Charles Dickens novel or something like that. Good for you. Well done. And then you might be that person who bounces out of bed lively and sprightly as anything in the morning, ready to go, alert from the first beep of the alarm, full of beans. Perhaps your brain kicks in immediately. Perhaps you're sharp and bright from the off. And do you know what? I think there are a lot of people, probably a disproportionate amount of people like that in Reigate. So it took me a while to settle in here when we arrived 8 years ago. The reason I think there are a lot of morning people in this town, because I think it's directly proportionate to the number of dogs. And there are a lot of dogs in Reigate. I honestly find the idea of actually volunteering to get up before it's properly daylight, in the cold and the pouring rain, to go out at the crack of dawn to the park or the downs for a walk, entirely baffling. I just don't get it. I mean, you're very responsible dog owners, and that's why you do it, obviously. But you've chosen to put yourself in that place. We speak different languages, you and I, but gladly there's space for all of us in the world. So as well as this reading we've got from Matthew this morning, there's another reading that's often read on Advent Sunday from Romans, and I'm just going to read you the first couple of verses of that. Paul says to the church in Rome, "The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over and the day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light." Wake up, says Paul. Be alert. It's nearly time for the day to start. Get ready. I think this is why we put Advent as the beginning of the church's year. Did you know that? In the church, it's New Year's Day today. Happy New Year. Have you made some resolutions? Maybe today is the day to do that. It's a moment for a refresh. It's the moment to reset old habits, possibly bad habits, and make some new ones. It's not just for this 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, but actually it's a time to reflect on our whole discipleship journey. Advent can be for us, if we like, a bit of a spiritual alarm clock. You may have a love-hate relationship with your alarm clock, as I do, but actually I know it's good for me. Advent's a reminder to us that we're meant to be alert, ready and raring to embark on the approaching day, that what we see, what we live, is temporary. We're called, spiritually at least, to be morning people. Those wide awake at dawn people, ready and eager for the day to begin. And as we go back to that passage from Matthew, it follows the same themes of watching and waiting with readiness. So I know it's Advent, and I know we had a brilliant Christmas event yesterday, but before we get too carried away with Bethlehem and angels and shepherds, let's just root ourselves in what's going on in this reading in Matthew. You see, just brain switch a little bit. Jesus is actually speaking to his disciples in Holy Week. So I'm mixing my festivals a little bit. We are all mixing festivals today. It's probably the Tuesday of Holy Week. So if you think so, kind of a couple of days later is Last Supper, Maundy Thursday, and then Good Friday. It's warm. The crowds are beginning to gather for Passover later in the week. And just before this passage, we do this, don't we? We have to kind of take a particular bit of the Bible. But there's a story unfolding here. Earlier in the day, Jesus has been in the temple. He's been teaching. He's actually been sparring with the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They've been trying to trap him into incriminating himself so they can find a way to arrest him and put an end to his disruptive ministry. And so Jesus is kind of coped with that and dealt with it and given, as he does, wise answers and answered questions with other questions and done what he does to do that. But that's kind of what he's been doing as a human. That's probably demanding, and he's just leaving the city and his disciples join him. And he's on his way to Bethany, and this evening he will sit at dinner in the house of Simon the leper, and a woman will anoint him with rich perfume in, again, a quite dramatic and disruptive way, prefiguring, if you like, his burial, as if she was anointing a body. So this is kind of a momentous day. But Jesus uses this time between leaving the city and what happens in Bethany in the evening to teach his disciples. And there are a few times like this in Holy Week where we see Jesus saying to his disciples important things because he knows he needs to prepare them. He wants to prepare them. They're his friends. He's telling them important things about what things are going to be like after he's gone. And so Matthew chapters 24 and 25 are an account of a kind of pause on this journey on this particular day. And so they walk out of the city of Jerusalem and across to the Mount of Olives. Mount of Olives is actually where the Garden of Gethsemane is, and Jesus went there a lot. And it's possible he was there or just sat up on the hillside. And it's quite possible that he, with his disciples, just looks back across the valley. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, you know that you have a great view from that side of the valley over back to the temple. And these days, Temple Mount, but that wouldn't have been there. and the Dome of the Rock and other parts that have obviously grown up since. But he would have looked back at the temple, and just before our passage, he said to the disciples, none of this is going to be standing. It's all going to fall down. And that's a shocking thing for them to hear. They believe God lives in the temple. They believe he's particularly situated himself there. He's called the Israelites to build that building. This is dramatic stuff that Jesus is telling them. And so, of course, they say, well, when's that going to happen? And how will we know that you're going to come back? Tell us how we're going to know that. I would ask that question, wouldn't you? If you thought that he was not going to be with you and you wanted to know when he was going to come back. So all of this discourse, this teaching that Jesus is giving, kind of is in a response to that short conversation. The buildings are going to fall down. The disciples are disturbed and they want to know some answers. And Jesus actually reels off quite a list of unappealing signs of what will happen. This is still before the bit that we get to today. He says there'll be war, there'll be earthquakes, there'll be famine, there'll be persecution of Christians, false prophets, and even false messiahs. These are the signs of things that are coming to an end before Jesus will return. But as he said, as we arrive at our passage this morning, Jesus actually answers the disciples' questions. Now, that in itself is a rarity for Jesus to give a direct, it wasn't the answer they wanted, but he gave a direct answer because they asked, when will that be? And Jesus answers, verse 26, about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, i.e. me. Jesus says, I'm the Son. I don't even know when it is. Only the Father. And he tells, we heard the story of Noah when the floods came. Everyone was just going about their daily business and it came entirely out of the blue. It was unexpected. It was unlooked for. It was dramatically disruptive. And in the chapter and a half after the bit that we've read in Matthew, Jesus tells his friends four parables about preparing for the unexpected, about being ready, about getting up before dawn. Or as Linford Christie would have said 30 years ago, can you believe it? 30 years ago, being ready to begin the race on the B of the bang. Now, I said 4 parables, so I think we can tell from that this is quite important. So I'm just going to tell you briefly what those parables are. You can go away and look at it afterwards. Jesus says, and we read this one, you don't know when the thief is going to come in the night, so you take precautions every night to secure your property. No one tells you in advance this is the night. You do it every night. He talks about being a faithful servant and running things with integrity while the master is away, because the master can come back at any moment. It's not that you want him to see you behaving well. You just behave well. You do it right. The third one, he talks about the bridesmaids at a wedding, and it's their job to welcome the groom, but the groom's time of arrival is not quite set, could be quite quick, could be a long time, could be after dark. And they need some lamps to light his way into the wedding feast. And some of them are quite prepared, and they've gone and got some spare oil so that if he's quite late, they can see. And some of them haven't, so of course they run out of oil, they need to go back and get some more oil, and while they're away getting the oil, the groom comes and they miss his arrival. And then the fourth, probably the most famous of these parables, is the parable of the talents. You know, where the 3 people are given a 1 and a 2 and a 5 talents, which was a coin. It's a bit of a play on words about gifts and skills as well. And it's about what they do with what they're given by the master while he's not there. So those are the 4 parables that Jesus goes on this hillside in Jerusalem between sparring with the Sadducees and Pharisees and going to dinner in the evening. This is what he wants to teach his disciples, the need to be ready, watching, and waiting. But I don't know about you, but I'm a creature of habit. We pack quite a lot into our time in our household, and that's made possible because we've developed routines. Routine gives me a little sense of control. Do you know that feeling? over events and circumstances. My fridge is covered in Duke of Edinburgh's this week. The maths test is next week. Carol service is the week after. I don't know if your fridges look a bit like that, or you have a diary, or you have something that helps you feel like you might roughly know what's going to happen on most days. I quite like things to be predictable, most of the time at least. But perhaps Advent is the time when we realize the veneer of that actually we live in a reality that Jesus is returning. And if we really truly believe that and remind ourselves of it time and time again, our sense of control and parents' evening and visiting the in-laws kind of control is only temporary. Perhaps it's a time when we remind ourselves Jesus could come tomorrow. If we're really on the ball, we might live with an expectation that he comes today. Maybe he's at the back door now. That when Jesus' kingdom is fully established, it won't be predictable, but we will need to be ready. So how do we take that idea seriously? That Jesus could come back at any moment. Do we really believe that? It's what the Bible tells us. Do we really believe it? Have we kind of assented to that in the way that we process things? Because if we look at that list of signs that Jesus gives that he's going to be back soon, things like war and famine and earthquakes and persecuted Christians, well, I don't know about you, but I can look at that list and I can compare it with the BBC website headlines. War? Yes, of course. We can see it. I know that there are probably some here who have experienced it. Famine? Absolutely. Looking worse and worse, particularly East Africa. Earthquakes? Indonesia in recent days. Persecuted Christians all the time. So if Jesus said these are the things you need to look out for, and we can tick off that list, not in a light-hearted way, in a serious-mannered way, in a heartbreaking way, we know it's sometime soon. It's not like we're still looking to the future for those things to happen. So Advent requires us to ask ourselves, what does it look like to wait and to watch with readiness in this season? I don't know about you, but when I think of waiting, I think of waiting rooms. Think of the last waiting room you were in. They're often singularly uninspiring places. The train station or the doctor's surgery, time seems to stand still, doesn't it? Or they might have one of those clocks that the battery needs changing, and it just seems like time never moves on, but it makes a lot of ticking noise, and that's the only thing you can hear. So is that what we're called to do in Advent, to sort of sit and read the old curly public health posters until something exciting happens? No, I think it's much more proactive than that. The theme, really, is that it's about attending to our personal discipleship. I mean, that's the answer to everything. If you hear any sermon ever, it's about attending to our following of Jesus, to our closeness to our master, to watching how he does things and trying to do it that way too. That's what it's all about. But let's try and be a bit more specific for today. So perhaps I think looking at those parables in Matthew and what he says, there's perhaps three things that we could do, and I'll finish with these. We could aim to live with the expectation that Jesus is coming any moment. We could allow that future to break into our present reality on a daily basis. Allow it to influence our choices. If you knew that Jesus was going to come back this Friday, we don't know that, obviously. It says in black and white in the gospel, even Jesus doesn't know when this is going to be. But let's imagine we did know he's coming on Friday. What does that do for you for the next 4 days? Think of your diary, your plans for the next 4 days. What things in your diary would matter more because of that? What things in your diary would definitely matter a lot less because of that? What would you cancel? What would you actually proactively arrange? Who would you want to speak to? What would you want to say? How would it make you feel? Is that scary? The reading talks about judgment. The reading talks about people staying and people being left behind. There's some things there that we need to think about how we feel about those things. Maybe you would feel hopeful, maybe even excited. Now, of course, the reality is that most of us do need to attend to daily life. And what we try not to do is just send you out with a pile of guilt that you even have a diary or a bank account or any of those things at all. That is life. That is what we have to do. And we're not sweeping away routine. We're not sweeping away long-term planning. But maybe sometime this week, in a quiet moment with a pen and a paper, you could ask yourself that question. What would look different in my diary and in my relationships if I knew Jesus was coming back in the next few days? Secondly, so that's live with this expectation, live with integrity. When I first started my adult working life, it was in the age of the dot-com boom. I feel old. The website lastminute.com had launched. I worked for a law firm. We acted for them. It was a big deal. They decided, not at my or any of my colleagues' advice, that they needed to put a little button in the top right-hand corner of their website. And this button said, "Look busy, the boss is coming." And you could literally click on this button and some spurious set of bar graphs and commentary would cover your screen so that whatever you were trying to book a holiday or a mini break theatre trip or something to London would disappear, and you'd suddenly look productive and you'd suddenly look like you were, top employee of the month. I think we can all see that isn't living life with integrity. We don't need a cosmic, look busy, the boss is coming kind of thing to cover up our indiscretions. Rather than keeping things like that hidden by bar graphs and lies, perhaps Advent is a time for the things that we're not proud of to bubble up, to take time to bring them out into the light. And there's no time like the present to make changes for the better. After all, as I said, it's New Year's Day, clean slate. We've just gathered around the table that tells us that we are forgiven. God has done everything necessary through Christ, that those things don't need to stay hidden and dark. They can be brought out and forgiven. So as the parable of the servant tells us, you can go back and look at that one. Live a life with integrity, and finally live a life of love. Back to that Romans reading I started with, and just before it, Paul has said to the Romans this is chapter 13, verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. Living in watchful anticipation of the coming of the kingdom just doesn't mean trying to second guess a date, trying to tie ourselves in knots with kind of the numbers of the Bible and that kind of predictive urge to control and to know exactly what's going to happen. We know what the signs are. Jesus has told us, and you know what? They're pretty much all fulfilled. It really could be any moment. Jesus, as he sits on the hillside in that pause on his important day with his disciples, tells them not even he knows the hour of his return. Living in anticipation means living with expectation. It means living in integrity. It means living a life of love, going out of our way to care for other people. This is dynamic, active waiting and watching. Surely for Jesus to arrive and to find us doing the very thing that he said was important, find us loving our neighbour as ourselves, surely that would be the best possible outcome. So who is God calling you to love? Who is he calling you to mend fences with? What does it look like for you to go through your diary and imagine what living with expectation looks like? There really is no time like the present. Why don't we stand together? Just going to ask their band to come back up. And just in these few moments before our service draws to a close, why don't we just open ourselves up to what God is saying to each of us about this season of Advent.